Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be getting into episodes 740 through 742, which will cover manga chapters 796 through 798. And with everyone rested up, it is time to get going as Fujitora is now making his move on Luffy and Law. So, synopsis. With Luffy and the Straw Hats mostly rested and their luck finally running out with Fujitora's die rolls, it's time for them to get out of Dressrosa, but not before Luffy makes sure that Rebecca and Kyros truly get the life that they both deserve. Okay, so let's get into the differences. So, during the scene where Sengoku offers to have his health donated, the bidding war between him and that soldier was added as filler for the anime. In the manga, he just simply offers to donate. Another change is in the manga, it's never explicitly stated that Tsuru rolled the deciding die roll that would mobilize the Marines. Instead, in the manga, you're never actually shown who rolled that die. But the way it's laid out in the manga, you would assume that Isho was the one that rolled based on how it's portrayed in the manga. But in the anime, it does show an extra scene where he actually does offer Vice Admiral Tsuru the die roll that would ultimately decide. And this does change kind of the context, and I'll kind of talk about this a little bit in the actual episode. Another change is, during the initial escape, just after Luffy splits off from the main group to go back for Rebecca, there are a couple scenes of Luffy fighting the Marines that were never in the manga. Similarly, later on, there are more scenes of Luffy trying to get to the palace and him getting stuck. And in the manga, after the Colosseum warriors appear to help, it just cuts straight to Luffy in front of Rebecca's palace yelling for Rebecca. Similarly, in episode 742, the first 3 minutes of that, where we see Luffy and Rebecca attacked by the Marines and him getting tangled in the sea stone netting, is all added filler. In the manga, after the Marines are knocked out by the unseen force, it cuts to Luffy explaining his plan to drop her off near the Flower Hill and act as a decoy for her, giving her time to go find Kyros, which we don't get to this moment till about the 7-minute mark in episode 742. When it really should have started the episode. And then the last change that I noticed was the anime shows a few more flashback scenes of Kyros, Rebecca, and Scarlet together in the past. In the manga, instead of the flashback, we immediately get the scene of Kyros opening the door and Rebecca standing outside it. The anime also adds some added tension by having Rebecca run through the forest getting cut up, so when she appears before Kyros, she's all beat up in the anime. But in the manga, there's really no indication of that ever happening. She's just there. And on a huge, mostly unrelated tangent, as a huge Detective Conan fan, these scenes of the family were always kind of weird because these voices are so ingrained in me as their Conan characters, and so it was like seeing Kogoro and Run being married and their kid is Haibara. So like, because Run and Kogoro are both father and daughter in Detective Conan, so which makes them having this like husband and wife dynamic very odd hearing these voices together like this. Alright, so with the differences out of the way, let's get into the episodes themselves. And at the end of the last set of episodes, we took a slight detour into setting up the next few arcs and the larger story, but with episode 740, we returned back to Dressrosa the next morning, where Vice Admiral Tsuru and former Fleet Admiral and current Inspector General Sengoku have arrived. And Tsuru, having pursued Doflamingo all these years, is here to finally collect him, most likely to just throw him in Impel Down. And Sengoku tagged along for some reason, only known to him, but we can all kind of guess why he's here, because of his relationship with Roshinante, aka Corazon. Although being retired, relieved from most of his duties, he is far more relaxed and jovial than we've ever seen him. And I personally like this side of Sengoku, just casually making comments and munching on his okaki rice crackers, like even joking at Fujitora berated like Sakazuki and joking that he's glad he's no longer Fleet Admiral. It's kind of funny. He is kind of giving off this sort of like retired old grandpa sort of feeling. Tsuru then point blank asks Fujitora why he hasn't gone after Luffy yet, and he explains that he can't decide himself, as this is such a moral dilemma that he's leaving it in the hands of fate with the dice rolls. While he does say that he isn't cheating, like I mentioned in the last podcast episode, I do think he is. But like I said, I don't really have much proof of this, but I do think Fujitora actually likes Luffy that much to the point where, yeah, he would influence the die rolls. And in a continuing scene later on that basically follows this one, we see them meeting Princess Manchuri, and we learn yet another ability of the Chiyu Chiyu fruit, and that is yet another really incredible ability when you think about it, where she can extract the health from a healthy person and then turn them into these little dandelion puffs, which she can then donate to others and heal them, much like donating blood almost. And I think it's really sweet that Sengoku even offers his health as he gets into a bidding war with one of the soldiers, and he says he can offer 100 people's worth of healing. And as impossible as it may seem to Manchuri, I honestly think that given Sengoku's power, stamina, and strength, even in retirement, I think he could actually produce that much. Because we see later on how Manchuri is like taking a lot out of each soldier to kind of incapacitate them later on, which is why I believe that Sengoku, like, he probably could donate so much health. Back at the palace, though, the kingdom is getting ready for the return of King Riku, and thereby making Rebecca the next in line as princess. But it seems just like with Scarlet all those years ago, Kyros' identity has to be kept hidden. Knowing this is why Kyros wrote that letter last episode to say his goodbye to Rebecca so that she can, live happily as a princess. But we can already see that there is a lot of her mother, Scarlet, in Rebecca, as we see Rebecca really struggling with this. And I mean, at this point, it's pretty obvious she wants to go back with her father and live away from the royal life. Now, back at Kyros' house, Luffy has kind of awakened, and again, in another fun callback to Arabasta, but pretty much all arcs, Luffy recovers by eating a huge amount of food thanks to Kinemon and Kanjuro, but nothing beats that Arabasta gag where Luffy just instantly eats a full cart full of like food with Sanji and Zoro yelling, "Was that a magic trick?" And then Luffy catching up on everything from Kyros to Sabo to Sanji and eating and still being tired. He can't make up his mind and cycles through all those emotions and states of being really quickly. But this moment is far funnier, I feel like, in the manga, because there's a moment where he's depicted as experiencing all of these emotions simultaneously, and his face is like divided into quadrants where each quad is part of one of those experiences, and he's having all of them at the same time. This does happen in the anime, but you only see it for like a split second, which is kind of a shame. I kind of wish the camera lingered on this a little bit while he was talking and eating and munching at the same time. I think something I didn't expect was that the false rumor about Rebecca's lineage was actually started by Kyros himself in order to protect Rebecca and her reputation, not getting sullied by Kyros' checkered past. However, I'm with Luffy on this one. I'm not buying it at all, and that he is way too hard on himself. Kyros has more than proved that he is more than his past. He is clearly a good man, and hell, an amazing man by his actions since he was a teenager. Everyone can see it except Kyros, and I think literally he is the only person who even cares. But at the same time, I completely understand how it would be incredibly difficult to get past, or even if it is possible to get past, something as huge as taking another person's life, especially since Kyros is such a good person with a kind soul. That must weigh a lot on someone like that. And he's kind of an underrated character, I think, even among the fan base, in my opinion. Like, he is yet another perfect example of your past shouldn't necessarily define you, especially if you are sincerely repentant and are doing everything you can to atone for those mistakes, much like those in that very room. Like Robin, Frankie, Law, Bellamy are all examples of this. Kyros has done more than enough to atone for those mistakes, and however, Kyros is still ready to leave and disappear so as not to be a burden on Rebecca's ability to enjoy a nice life, which I think we all know is a mistake. But this argument has to be put on hold because they get word from both Leo and Bartolomeo at the same time that the Marines have finally begun to mobilize against the pirates. But this scene is more memorable to me for Bartolomeo's overwhelming reaction to being in the presence of 5 Straw Hat members at once. He is completely starstruck and blinded both figuratively and literally. It's revealed that the die roll wasn't a 1 and it was a 6. And what's interesting about this, as I mentioned in the differences section, it's never shown that Tsuru rolled the die, and it seemed like fate finally intervened. But the anime goes to show that Tsuru is the one that rolled the die this time, which is another reason why I think that the 2 times that Isho was the one that rolled the die, he was influencing the die roll. And I know I usually default to the manga, but the fact that Oda allowed this scene to stay in there like this makes me believe that he wants to at least create some ambiguity there as to like whether Isho was actually influencing the dye. Because otherwise, this scene doesn't really make any sense. Which I guess, from anime standards, it could easily just be thrown in there and not make things make sense. But anyways, with that though, the time has finally come for them to all escape, and I freaking love how pumped I get to see everyone coming together to help them escape. Like Kyros and Leo have already been coordinating getting them a ride off the island, while the Colosseum warriors have banded together to secure their escape. And seeing all these completely different people who are at one point all trying to kill each other, and all now working together to help the Straw Hats, is freaking awesome. And I get goosebumps watching this scene because I've fallen in love with all these characters. And I remember at the time thinking, man, I really hope maybe even one of these guys joins the crew. But I had a hard time figuring out how that would be possible too, because of the fact that the story just didn't seem like it was going in that direction, which was kind of a shame to me at the time. And so, yeah, it was kind of hard reading these chapters thinking, man, one of these guys should join. But now it's a mad dash to escape Dressrosa, which is really fun and intense. But Luffy has other plans, as we can all guess what he's going to do. He knows, having spent so much time with both Kyros and Rebecca, they want nothing more than to be a family again, and he's not about to let that slip away. Zoro, as always, has complete faith in Luffy's judgment and just lets him go. And plus, he knows by now it'll just waste more time arguing with him and trying to stop him anyway, so there's, you might as well just let him go. And that moment where Maynard is being duped by Jeet over the Denden Mushi is freaking hilarious. Like, the fact that Maynard is even talking or taking him seriously for even a few minutes is so bad. The face, like, okay, first off, he sounds so shady, but not only that, how can you not tell by just looking at the Denden Mushi? The face that it takes on while Jeet is talking is shady as hell. I guess it could be a commentary on just how disposable the soldiers are in the eyes of the higher ranking officers, that they can't even tell them apart from anyone else. Which, I'm kidding. I know it's not that deep. I think one of Luffy's more underrated abilities, though, in the next scene, is his ability to read people so well, and allowing him to kind of dig through all the masks and the BS down to what people truly want in their hearts, and gets them to honestly see and acknowledge that themselves. And once he does, he does everything he can to help them realize those wishes. He's done something like this in almost every arc, starting all the way back with Kobe, as well as convincing Sanji to chase his dreams, getting Nami to ask for help, convincing Chopper to leave his home and become a pirate, getting Bibi to realize that she doesn't have to shoulder everything alone, and allowing Robin to admit that she wants to live and sail with her nakama, of course being the most iconic instance of this. And there are countless other smaller examples of this throughout the story, and in the post-time skip era, we have the two examples of Shirahoshi and Rebecca, who, they also get to sort of live out their dreams, even though they're hesitant to admit that they want these things. There's just something about this that I love, because in real life, you can't really do this. At least I can't, because I don't have the level of intuition of people to be absolutely convinced of what people really want, and also be so sure that I can just yell at them, cutting through all the BS. So seeing it in a fictional setting is really satisfying, because I think on some level we all wish we could do something like this for people. That's very simple and straightforward, to help a friend or a loved one recognize what they really want and cut through all the BS. And it's just unfortunately not really realistic in real life. People are far too complicated, and to a certain extent, yeah, you can help them see like what they really want if you know them well enough. And sure, I've done that in the past, but it's not quite as easy as Luffy makes it out to be in the series, for sure. And you definitely cannot do this with anyone. But regardless, I think it's so heartbreaking when you realize that Rebecca is hesitating going after her father because she still feels incredibly guilty for the hurtful things that she said about him not being her real father. She said to him at the Colosseum, and that moment where she says to Luffy, "Does he not want to live with me? Am I nothing but trouble to him?" is so sad, especially when you remember that she looks older and she's been through a lot and she's very capable. She's still a 16-year-old child that wants nothing more than to finally get to be an actual child and be with her family, to reclaim that childhood that she lost because of Doflamingo. So when Luffy busts her out of that window, it's always such a hell yes moment. Like you're like, go get your happiness. But while it's a very heartwarming moment for us, it's now turned into a princess kidnapping pursuit with the Marines turning their attention to Luffy. But that moment where the snipers are targeting Luffy is just so ridiculously stupid. Like, he's got a royal hostage on his back and they're trying to snipe someone jumping through midair at high speeds. Like, this is such a terrible idea if your goal was to save Rebecca. Especially since it's pretty well known and documented that Luffy possesses the Gomu Gomu fruit and is virtually bulletproof. So... But then again, I guess this could also be a deeper commentary on how the Marines are still putting capturing pirates above helping the people. But again, I don't really know if this really goes that deep. I mean, maybe. Luckily, all the snipers just kind of collapse for some reason, but it's revealed that it's not Conqueror's Haki that subdued them, but something else. So, speaking of this scene, when this chapter came out, it was really unclear as to whether what was knocking them out. There were a couple theories that it was the Tontaras, but it never outright shows any of them or even like a trace of them. The only thing that would somewhat indicate that was the bullets just disappearing with a poof sound. However, later on, we see Maoji was having Manshiri take enough health energy from the soldiers so that they would exhaust themselves at the right time. And that seems like the most likely outcome, but that still doesn't account for the bullets disappearing. The other possibility that came to mind at the time for me was that Isho was doing it, but not through Haki, but through his gravity. Like, he was pushing everyone down into the ground and manipulating the bullets to just kind of go away. Especially the anime adds a moment where you actually do see Isho walking among the downed soldiers just after this, whereas the manga didn't have this scene. But when you look at the soldiers, they don't have the same lines that you see when they're being affected by the gravity. So here's my theory, and probably the answer that is most likely obvious from watching the anime and reading the manga later on. I think ultimately it is Manshiri's power is what's exhausting them and making them knock over. And the other Tontara warriors are the ones that steal the bullets in midair with super speed. I think it is kind of all but indirectly confirmed near the end of episode 742 that this is the case, as we see Manshiri and Maoji have that conversation, and then just after that we see the other Tontaras like stealing all the weapons, the ammunition, the knives, and all that stuff. So I think it pretty much all but confirms that that's the case. But the anime adds this weird ambiguity with Isho walking. But, you know, even when I read this in the manga, I wasn't super sure until I saw that scene later on. Now, Rebecca, with the help of Luffy, does make it to Kyros in time, and their reunion is such a great scene. Seeing Kyros finally validated, realize that he is worthy of being Rebecca's father. However, for me, I really enjoyed that moment afterwards with Viola and Riku. How for Viola, this is now the second time that she's been asked to take their place as the princess, and Riku just kind of sitting down, joyfully laughing, realizing how alike Rebecca and Scarlet are. I think allowing them both some solace that their sister/daughter lives on in Rebecca in such a very real way, which makes them both really happy, which I think is a really like sweet moment between the two of them to kind of remember Scarlet and to really commemorate both Rebecca and Kyros coming together again. Back at the coast on the East Port, everyone has arrived except Luffy is still trying to make his way back. But now Law has also disappeared, and Fujitora is now hot on their tail. But luckily, the Colosseum warriors and the Tontara continue to step up with disrupting the Marines' efforts to capture anyone, which is awesome to see. It reminds me a lot of like Shushu back in Orange Town, like where most of the townsfolk mistake the Straw Hats for evil pirates and try to run them out of town. But Shushu and Boodle stick up for them. I feel like this scene is like a much more grander version of that. But even with their combined strength, I just don't see how they're going to stand up to Fujitora. His immense power is crazy. But then again, will Fujitora kind of hold back since he seemingly doesn't want to capture them? And yeah, Fujitora is such a fascinating character, especially given the position of power he's in as a Marine. Like, he isn't afforded as much freedom in pursuing his own sense of justice, but at the same time, he is one of the few people that has been able to push back. Not only that, has the courage to actually push back against the fleet admiral and thereby also the Gorose. However, the biggest cliffhanger is that Law is missing because he split off and has gone to see the former fleet admiral Sengoku himself in a private meeting, along with Sengoku's new friend Uho, the gorilla, who apparently became friends with Sengoku because he enjoyed Sengoku's okaki crackers so much. And this is such a random development that literally gets no attention, but is just kind of a thing in such an intense emotional scene, which is, again, Oda's like weird, wacky humor kind of cracking its head through the crust there. Law sought out Sengoku, and it seems Sengoku was waiting to be found by Law so that they can both seemingly confirm their suspicions of each other that they both knew about and cared for Rocinante, aka Corazon. Here we get to see a little bit of Sengoku's side of the relationship with Rocinante, and it was really eye-opening to see this side of Sengoku. It kind of completely changed how I viewed this character from a more neutral, antagonistic force or obstacle to someone far more sympathetic and favorable. I actually kind of like Sengoku now and view him much more favorably than I did during Marineford, especially after this scene, seeing that not only was he a kind person and wanted to help this little boy who had gone through a horrific trauma and not let him become Doflamingo, and then also being distraught over Rocinante's death, but having to shoulder that burden all by himself, as he was the only one who knew that Rocinante was even an undercover Marine. You can kind of see just how far the admirals and fleet admiral have their hands bound by those positions and the bidding that they have to do on the Gorose and Celestial Dragon's behalf. It kind of makes you think about Sakazuki and his standing. Like, don't get me wrong, I think Sakazuki is a bad person, but I wonder about him and his sort of sense of duties as well. Like, it just makes me think. And this part I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but it makes me think like maybe he's kind of not horrifically bad. I think the things that he did in Ohara by shooting at the refugee ship was pretty evil. But I also wonder like how much of that is being influenced by the fact that his sense of justice depends on what the world sees as justice. Like, his absolute justice is absolute because the people who set the rules are so evil. Like, I wonder if Sengoku had a more sort of benevolent leader and who set sort of the standard and the morals, like, his absolute justice would potentially be good in the sense that he'd still be an intense guy, but I don't know if that he would be outright evil. He's very thorough about how he does things. And if you maybe change the definitions that he goes by on what justice is, maybe you can channel that into something better. I don't know. Sakazuki is a very interesting character too when you really dig deep, and particularly the more you learn about him from here on out too. I'm not going to spoil anything. In fact, there's really nothing to spoil, but you start to learn a little bit, like little details here and there that kind of make you question what is Sakazuki's like internal thought process. You never get a clear answer, but you start getting little tiny hints here and there. So yeah, I would definitely kind of pay attention to Sakazuki and sort of his behavior. But anyways, getting back to Sengoku, now that he has a chance to talk to someone about his lost surrogate son and come face to face with the reason that son died that day, in the anime they cut it off here as a cliffhanger, which sucks. But for us manga readers at the time, this was all contained in one chapter, so it wasn't an issue. But this is, to this day, one of my favorite scenes that always lives in my mind, and I cannot wait to get into it. And yeah, it sucks we have to stop here, especially because I hate that I'm taking a break just before some of my favorite moments, and not just this arc, but in the entire series as well. But as always, I will be taking a break for the last few weeks of the year. This year, I might take 3 weeks off. That's okay though. We'll have something really great to look forward to at the beginning of next year. And I want to thank everyone, as always, for all your support throughout this year. According to the Spotify Wrapped summary that I looked at, the podcast has experienced a 39% growth in listening time and a 12% growth in subscribers. So a huge thank you to everyone who has supported me or has jumped on board in the last year or so to this podcast. So again, much thanks to everyone that has supported either by listening or by donating. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And this is always really fun to do. And yeah, I can't believe it's another year. It's been almost 2025. So 5 years basically since I've started this. So, and we're already at Dressrosa and we're about to head into the Zou arc. So pretty wild stuff, but yeah, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes and to see pictures of my manga collection. Check those out as well. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section. So stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode and next year. Happy New Year and happy holidays. Bye.